9,000 miles from Britain, on the far side of the earth, dozens of sailors would be brutally murdered and cannibalized. The story of the Boyd Massacre continues to terrify to this day. This is a tale of lost hope at the ends of the earth. HMS Boyd was a British brigantine, a type of vessel used to transport cargo across oceans. By early 1800, she had been repurposed as a convict ship, chartered to take the perilous voyage to the newly colonised land of Australia. She was captained by John Thompson, an experienced commander. On March 10, 1809, 139 male convicts were loaded onto the ship, setting sail for the southern continent. Arriving in Australia in October, Boyd offloaded the prisoners at the new colony of Port Jackson and set sail again. She was bound for New Zealand on a mission to source good timber as cargo. Sailing to the distant islands, Boyd carried a crew and passengers totaling 70 souls. Among the passengers were several freed convicts hoping to make a new life in New Zealand. But the ship's crew also included a special passenger, a boy from New Zealand called Te Ara. Te Ara was the son of an important Maori chieftain from Whangaroa Bay on the North Island. For the last year, Te Ara had been sailing the Southern Ocean on whaling vessels, earning his keep as a ship's boy. Halfway through the voyage across the stormy Tasman Sea, Te Ara caught the ire of the ship's captain. One version of events recounts how the ship's cook threw some cutlery overboard. Seeking to shift the blame, the cook accused Te Ara of theft. Another version of events claims that Te Ara was lazy and sullen. Being the son of a chieftain, he refused to perform his duties as the ship's boy. Whatever the turn of events, the captain proved himself a cruel master. He brought Te Ara to the ship's anchor and tied him down. For days, Te Ara was deprived of food and water as punishment. But this wasn't enough for the captain, and as Te Ara refused to cooperate, the captain's anger grew. Taking out the ship's cat of nine tails, Thompson had the boy whipped mercilessly. The humiliation caused Te Ara's heart to burn with rage. The boy in that moment decided to exact revenge on the cruel captain and the ship itself. As Te Ara was recovering from the whipping, he hatched a plan. He decided to convince Thompson that he had learned his lesson, that he would perform his duties without complaint. As time passed, the captain thought that the boy had learned his lesson and had fallen into line. After working hard to regain Thompson's trust, Te Ara convinced him to sail to Whangaroa Bay on the North Island of New Zealand. Te Ara spoke of vast forests of tall trees, perfect timber to fulfill the ship's mission. This was a lie to convince the captain to bring Te Ara back to his tribe. After several weeks of sailing, the Boyd sighted New Zealand. Changing course to a northerly direction, Te Ara helped guide the captain to Whangaroa Bay. As the ship drew nearer to the coast, it dropped anchor. It was at this moment that Te Ara seized his chance. Jumping overboard, he swam ashore. He made his way through the forest to the village of his tribe. Speaking with tribal elders, the boy told the story of his brutal treatment. He was the son of a chieftain, and even though British law permitted Captain Thompson to flog any man under his command, the Maori did not see it the same way. To attack the chieftain's son was to attack the chieftain himself. This would demand retribution. The tribe formed a plan to avenge this indignity. Making contact with the Europeans, the tribe's chief named Tupui invited Captain Thompson on an expedition up a local river. With him, the commander took the chief officer and 3 other men. Packed into Maori canoes, the scouting party made its way up the river, eventually losing sight of the ship. It was at this point that John Thompson, the cruel captain, would meet his retribution. After travelling a while upriver, the Maori led the scouting party to shore, dragging their canoes onto the sandy beach. It was at this point that a signal was given, and the party was set upon by dozens of Maori warriors, who brutally clubbed the Europeans to death. Their bodies were carried back to the village, where they were dismembered and consumed. But for the Maori chieftain, this act wasn't enough. The entire crew of the Boyd would have to be destroyed to satisfy the injustice. Stripping the bodies bare, the warriors donned the clothes of the slain Englishmen. Dressed in their clothes, the Maori patiently waited. Gathering themselves into a longboat, the Maori began to row for the Boyd. On board the ship, the crew were not expecting the captain to return so soon. Amidst the darkness, the crew would not have been able to see that the men in the boat were not the men who had left in the scouting party. The Maori hailed the crew of the Boyd, but waiting in the darkness were other canoes, filled with warriors. The boats drew closer to the Boyd, surrounding it in the darkness. And then a signal was given. Leaping aboard the ship, the warriors set upon the crew with a furious vengeance, striking and killing man after man on deck. Several of the ship's occupants managed to scale the rigging and hide amongst the canvas and ropes. From there, they watched with utter terror as a scene of carnage unfolded. Below decks, several of the freed convicts and the remaining crew huddled, attempting to hide from the onslaught. Searching the ship, the Maori dragged the cowering Europeans onto the deck, where one by one they were clubbed to death. The bodies of many of the crew were brutally dismembered and piled into heaps on the ship's deck. Of the 70 souls who set sail from Port Jackson Colony, only 5 had survived the massacre. The Maori warriors gathered the bloody corpses of the slain Europeans into their canoes and paddled off into the night. Waiting until dawn, the survivors left their hiding places and gathered together on the ship's deck. We can only imagine the utter terror that must have gripped the survivors of the massacre. It was at this moment that fate had other things in store. Canoes appeared on the horizon. Drawing alongside the ship and climbing aboard were several Maori warriors. But it wasn't Tepui returning to finish his bloody task, but those from a different tribe. A new chieftain named Tipihi climbed aboard. The survivors did not speak the local language, but it was obvious to Tipihi what had taken place. Tipihi offered assistance to the ship's survivors and gathered them onto his canoes. He was to take them to his village and decide what to do next. As the canoes made their way along the coast, their luck, however, took a turn for the worse. War canoes were spotted rowing towards Tipihi and the rescued survivors. The Wangaroa tribe had returned. With few options, Tipihi returned to the shore and decided to make his escape by foot. Landing just behind them, the Wangaroa leapt from their canoes and chased the fleeing party. In the chaos, the Wangaroa managed to capture the fleeing Europeans. They were bound together and then loaded onto canoes. Little is known about the events following, but it was revealed later that prisoners were treated with no kindness. One of the survivors, the ship's second mate, was put to death and eaten after he could no longer make fishing hooks for the tribe. Without a crew, the Boyd was left anchored in Wangaroa Bay. Tepui decided to return to the ship. He was after the ship's gunpowder. At this point in time, New Zealand colonists were engaged in warfare with the local tribes who had learned the importance of firearms in their struggle against the colonizers. These new weapons would help the Wangaroa tribe. Climbing aboard, Tepui found the ship's armory deep below the waterline. There, he found muskets with large barrels of gunpowder strewn about. The Maori attempted to work the new weapons, but unfamiliar with them, they turned to smashing open barrels of gunpowder. With the powder spilling all across the floor, one of the tribesmen struck a flint. The spark started a fire, triggering an enormous explosion that killed the man, along with 9 others instantly. Above deck, Tepui and the other members of the tribe saw flames leaping from below and made the decision to jump from the burning ship. The Maori gathered into their canoes and left the Boyd to burn. News of the massacre travelled fast to the surrounding colonial settlements. Wild tales of brutal murders and vicious cannibals electrified the colonists. The stories also told of several survivors in the captivity of a war chief. Hearing this news, a local captain, Alexander Berry, put together a rescue party and sailed for Wangaroa Bay. His mission was to recover the European prisoners. Sailing to different Maori settlements, Captain Berry captured and held both Tepui, the murderous chieftain, and Tipihi, the man who had offered assistance. He demanded the safe release of the survivors of HMS Boyd. Berry told the chiefs that they were to be transported back to Europe to answer for their crimes unless they returned the stolen property from the ship and returned the prisoners. Messengers were sent to their villages and it was agreed that the prisoners should go free. Captain Berry also took possession of the Boyd's journal and other articles of value that had been stolen. The imprisoned leaders were released back to their villages, stripping them of their ranks of chieftain. The blood debt had been paid, and to the Maori, the matter was now finally settled. The Boyd's debt had been paid. After all this fighting, one would think that the demands of retribution would be done, but this was not the case for many colonists who lived in New Zealand. They demanded that further punishment should be met on the Maori for such a horrific act. In March 1810, the crew of 5 whaling ships decided to exact their revenge on the local tribes. Sailing to Waiora Bay, the crew made anchor and landed their longboats. Making their way to a village, the men fired upon the villagers, slaughtering dozens of men, women, and children. But the whalers had made a grave mistake. The village they had attacked had belonged to Tipihi, the chieftain who had attempted to rescue the survivors of the Boyd. Tipperhee was not present when the reprisals took place. After the killing was done, the whalers returned to their ships and sailed away, leaving a scene of destruction in their wake. Learning the cause of his village's destruction, Tipperhee took up arms and gathered together his surviving warriors. He made his way to Whangaroa Bay and attacked the tribe of Tipeu. Tipperhee was killed in the fighting, along with many of his warriors. We do not know if the murderous chieftain Tipui had justice served on him. News of the Boyd's massacre reached Australia and then travelled to Europe with returning ships. The brutal killings terrified those in Britain, and many ships bound for the distant islands cancelled their voyages for fear of being slaughtered like those on the Boyd. For many years after the events, the Maori carried a fearsome reputation. A pamphlet circulating in Europe warned sailors off the Cannibal Isles. It read, "Touch not that cursed shore lest you these cannibals pursue." The brutal humiliation of the ship's boy Tayara at the hands of Captain Thompson came back to haunt the crew of the Boyd. If the captain had only shown some restraint, this horrific massacre may never have come to pass. Tayara got his revenge. This was the story of the Boyd Massacre. I just want to say thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment. I'll see you next time.